Good morning. This is Kenneth and Heather with the Advancing Equity Coalition, here to give you our update about last night's business board meeting for Minneapolis Public Schools. Heather, how are you doing this morning?
I'm tired. That was a long school board meeting.
Yeah, the meeting went later than they have recently gone. And so we are tired, but we also very clearly remember what happened because it feels like it just ended. So, with that, Heather, do you want to give us a rundown on what went down last night?
Yeah, so last night we heard a CDD update. Um, we got an update on facilities, an update on enrollment, which, by the way, enrollment is down a little bit. We are at 28,689 students right now.
Yeah.
Yep. That slide went away really fast last night. And
Mhm.
also, just a reminder to parents that enrollment season or your ability to like ask for which school you wanted is going to be start opening up very soon. I think the 17th of November. We got an update on academics under the CDD. We got an update on integration or like are the magnet schools successful? And so we saw that in some schools, the kindergarten numbers do have an increase in white students. A little bit of tension there about like what makes a good school a good school. Is it the amount of white students that makes it a good school? And how do we measure things are working? But anyway, that was there. And then we got an update on the strategic plan. We talked about the vision of the board, the mission of the board. There was a long conversation there that we'll get into in a little bit. And then the board really heard all of the metrics that the school district is proposing in order to think about like how we would know if the strategic plan was successful. So those were those four categories. We've talked about them before, but they're academics, student well-being, effective staff, and school and district climate. So we talked about that. Then there was a whole bunch of contracts that the board voted to approve, which like that's a lot of negotiating when I was listening to that. And then there was a long conversation about the Page Amendment. And ultimately, the board ended up voting on sort of like some language that they said we would support the Page Amendment if the Page Amendment addressed or changed some of the language that we find concerning. And so they did that. Um,
And they approved that on a 4-3 vote because two board members were missing at that point.
yeah,
And yeah, only half of the board essentially supported that amendment or that resolution, while the other half said they think the legislature should talk it out and we should wait to get more information.
yeah, that was a long conversation with a lot of people who felt really strongly about that conversation. And so at the end of all of that, the board meeting adjourned at 10:05. I remember because it was late. But yeah, so I think it was a lot. And with all of that information, what is the slide of the night, Kenneth?
That's a great question. So while there was a lot that happened last night, the slide of the night is this specific slide. I think the most robust conversation that the board had last night was about this slide and what the vision for the new strategic plan should be. Um, we see that there are two things that really stood out to the board. The first was the beginning, which is around all students, regardless of their background, zip code, and personal needs. If that should be the focus for this vision, or if the focus should be specifically on our BIPOC students. There was like a back and forth where legal counsel weighed in a couple of different times because it's unclear around the guidance that the district's legal counsel was trying to share with the board. And for all transparency, right? Like I specifically called in and asked for this to be changed. We know that our coalition really wants to see a focus on our BIPOC students. And so we also heard a few other parents call in support of that as well. Um, and so what ended up happening was finally it sounded like legal counsel was suggesting that we don't use this language around BIPOC students, but we somehow um, create an additional focus on BIPOC students. And so we'll see what the board decides when it comes to that. But the other conversation, which was probably the primary conversation really when it came to this slide, was around the discussion about well-rounded education.
Yep.
And so Director Cerrillo has consistently brought this up since August when the vision was first put, like they first had a discussion about this vision. And she said that there is no good translation of the term well-rounded in Spanish. Director Elamine, also at the board retreat in August, said well-rounded is not working for our Black and brown kids. Like this cannot be the language that we use. And so last night there was a lot of tension because the board essentially couldn't move forward with a decision around what the language is going to be. And so they're going to continue to have that conversation. Some board members were forced to be put on the spot, which was, I think, uncomfortable and weird in terms of like, what should another word be? There's a lot of discussion around what works, what doesn't work. But yeah, so next month, before the meeting next month, the board is going to try to come up with some suggestion to give to the district around what the vision of the board should be for the strategic plan. So that was the slide of the night. A lot of discussion, a lot of tension. I think that was kind of the undercurrent of the entire meeting, is that there's just a lot of tension right now, which we can get into. But let's go into our most valuable moment and our do better moment. So I can share first, Heather, for our most valuable moment. I'll actually do both my most valuable moment and my do better moment because they're connected. So my most valuable moment actually goes to Director Jourdain. Director Jourdain does not speak much at school board meetings, but he actually took the opportunity last night during the academic update and the CDD update to say, like, can we get some information about what's going on with our math and literacy scores? Because we know that this pandemic has been awful, but we also cannot continue to blame the pandemic on our literacy and math outcomes. And so I would just like to have more information about what's going on with math and literacy. And I thought that was an incredibly astute observation and statement for Director Jourdain to make. And I just really appreciate, again, his focus in this moment on like the academic outcomes of our students, which leads me to my do better moment, which is for Senior Officer Fearing and Superintendent Graff. Ultimately, I think too, I think it's problematic to have, forgive me, I think it's problematic to have an academic update where we do not hear about math and literacy. I do not know how you put out an academic update, and especially in this district where we know we're struggling in math, we know we're struggling in literacy, to not provide any information around what is going on in math and literacy. We learned a little bit about, there are 3 bullet points about some materials that were available in libraries now, but the fact that math and literacy, like there wasn't a slide or a section that was dedicated to like, here are all the things that are happening in math and literacy, really point to a bigger issue that our coalition elevated during the process of the CDD, and I think other folks have real issues with, is that there was no academic plan, and we're still waiting on an academic plan attached to the comprehensive district design. And so that was my most valuable moment and do better moment. And I think that we need to see better, and we heard last night that there will be an update on like the FAST scores, which do measure literacy and math in 2 weeks during the committee of the whole. But still, I don't think you can do any academic update without providing an update on math and providing an update on literacy. So Heather, I will pass it to you.
Okay, so let me start with my do better moment. Last night during public comment, there was a group of teachers that made public comment, and they came predominantly from Northeast Middle School. And for those of you who aren't aware, there was an incident not long ago at Northeast Middle School where a teacher used a racial slur. Students were unhappy about it. They protested. There was some things that could have been handled better, but at the end of the day, we know that students of color feel harmed, unheard, unseen, unlistened to right now, right? And last night, what we saw was this contingent, and I'm going to say this, of white women standing up and talking about the things that are happening at Northeast Middle School. And I'm just going to say that they used a lot of racially coded language. to talk about students. They did not name the harm that their coworker had done to create a lot of the tension in situations that are happening at Northeast. And they were basically asking the superintendent and the board for more staff to help them through this, which I think that we probably do need more staff in all of our buildings, right? But I felt very angry at a group of teachers who were, in my view, really blaming students for their own reaction to what they experienced from their coworker without ever naming the thing that happened. And I just, the fact that that happened in a boardroom and that they felt comfortable in our city in this moment coming forward and making those kinds of statements about Black students was quite appalling to me. And I'm going to link that together with my most valuable moment, because one of the some of the language that the teachers used were things like polite, kind, swearing, nice, right? And those, we know, safe. We know that a lot of that language doesn't serve the conversation fully around students of color, and there's a lot of tone policing and racism in those words. And Director Elamine stated very clearly last night multiple times, like, nice is not working for our students. I'm done with nice. And so I really feel like her just saying, like, we got to have a more honest, less polite conversation, which we did, right? The board had a less polite, more honest conversation last night. And I appreciated her just saying that so directly, especially in the room in which those very words had just been used, I think, to weaponize.
Yeah, I don't want to get too far into this. We can check out our debrief, but yeah, last night some of those public comments, in my opinion, were appalling. My thing is, like, are we talking about academics and are we abdicating our responsibilities? And, like, just to hear all these teachers say, like, it was inevitable that, like, that our environment would erupt. It wasn't inevitable. Like, these are students, these are kids, these are people who want to be loved, people who want relationships, people who are striving to be in safe environments. And yes, there are things that are difficult and hard. And, like, you have a responsibility, you have agency to, like, create a safer, better environment. And, like, I know that that cannot happen when you're also not owning up to the fact around, like, what one of your colleagues said, and you're not holding them accountable in the building in the same way that you're trying to hold the district accountable and blame our students and say, like, you need what feels like you want them to call in the National Guard to support you. Like, it's like, that's what our city just went through. So with that, check out our debrief. We have lots more to say, but thank you all for listening. Heather,
Bye.
thank you.